Golden Girls looked like besties on TV, but the real story is much darker. Betty annoyed Bea by flirting with the audience. Estelle Getty was so terrified she couldn't remember her lines. And when Betty won an Emmy before anyone else, Bea was so furious she refused to speak to her. Even the casting director heard Bea use a shocking word to describe Betty. The truth about these TV grandmas will make your jaw drop. First, let's go through the background of 4 Golden Girls. Betty White began her career in radio right after high school. But everything changed in 1949 when she joined a new live TV show called Hollywood on television. It aired on KLAC-TV in Los Angeles and ran for 5 hours a day, 6 days a week. It was exhausting, and unlike anything else on TV, at first, Betty co-hosted with a man named Al Jarvis. When he left in 1951, she shared the screen briefly with actor Eddie Albert, but soon Betty took over the show by herself. That made her the first woman ever to host a talk show solo. She talked straight into the camera for hours, filling time with whatever she could. Stories, jokes, sketches, and eventually guests. Some even say Betty might have been the very first woman to ever appear on television. Back in 1939, when she was still in high school, she sang songs from The Merry Widow during a test broadcast before TV was even public. In 1952, Betty did something unheard of. At just 28 years old, and still living with her parents, she co-founded a TV production company. It was called Bandy Productions, named after her dog, Bandit. She started it with writer George Tibbles and producer Don Fedderson. At a time when men ran almost everything on TV, Betty became one of the first women in the U.S. to co-own a production company. This gave her control over what happened both in front of and behind the camera. Their first big project was Life with Elizabeth. It started as a small sketch on her talk show, but became a full sitcom that aired across the country from 1953 to 1955. Betty didn't just star in it, she produced it too. She won a local Emmy in 1952 for the show. It made history. She was the first woman to star in and produce her own sitcom. Betty was also a favorite guest on game shows. In the 1960s and 70s, she became known for her quick wit and perfect timing. She never hosted Password herself. Her husband, Alan Ludden, did, but she was a regular and unforgettable guest. Then, in 1983, she broke another barrier. Betty became the first woman to win a daytime Emmy for Outstanding Game Show Host. She won for hosting Just Men on NBC. Her appearances on game shows made her a familiar face in American homes. They helped build the warm, funny persona that audiences later loved in her sitcom roles. By the end of her life, Betty had won 7 Emmy Awards across many decades, a rare achievement in TV. In 1973, Betty landed a guest role that changed her career forever. She played Sue Ann Nivens in an episode of The Mary Tyler Moore Show called The Lars Affair. Sue Ann was a cheerful TV homemaker on the outside, but secretly flirty and sharp as a knife. The part wasn't written for Betty. The script just called for a Betty White type, so the producers decided to ask the real Betty White. At first, they hesitated because she was close friends with Mary Tyler Moore, but Betty crushed the role. Sue Ann was supposed to be a one-time character, but audiences loved her. Betty stayed on the show and won back-to-back Emmy Awards in 1975 and 1976. That role was so strong, it almost followed her into her next big job. When The Golden Girls was being cast, Betty was first picked to play the flirty Blanche. Bea Arthur was already a star on Broadway long before she played Dorothy Zbornak. In 1966, she played Vera Charles in the musical Mame with Angela Lansbury. She had wanted the lead role, but still won a Tony Award for Best Featured Actress. Earlier, she had performed in The Threepenny Opera and played Yente the matchmaker in Fiddler on the Roof in 1964. During that show, she clashed with the director, Jerome Robbins, who she later called a dreadful human being, the only one who ever made her cry. Her move to TV began in 1971, when Norman Lear cast her as Maude Findlay in an episode of All in the Family. The character was so popular that CBS gave her a spin-off called Maude, which ran from 1972 to 1978. She won an Emmy in 1977 and became known as a feminist TV icon, years before The Golden Girls began in 1985. Rue McClanahan started out as a theater actress in 1957 when she moved to New York. After over 10 years, she finally made her Broadway debut in 1968 in the musical Jimmy Shine with Dustin Hoffman. The show show ran for 161 performances and opened the door to TV roles. She played Caroline Johnson, a wild nanny, in the soap Another World, and later Margaret Jarden in Where the Heart Is. Her talent for comedy stood out when she joined Maude as Vivian Harmon, Bea Arthur's friend. That show built a connection between the two actresses that helped later in The Golden Girls. Rue eventually played Blanche Devereaux, the flirty Southern belle, and won an Emmy in 1987. Her success came after decades of hard work in theater. Estelle Getty's road to fame took much longer. She spent 40 years trying to make it as an actress before finally landing her big role at age 62. She played Sophia Petrillo, Dorothy's sharp-tongued mother, even though in real life she was actually younger than Bea Arthur by over a year. She failed her first two auditions for The Golden Girls because producers thought she looked too young to play someone in her 80s. For her third try, she showed up wearing old clothes and begged the makeup artist to age her properly. "To you, this is just a job," she told him, "but to me, it's my entire career down the toilet unless you make me look 80. Her determination worked. At the time, she was filming Torch Song Trilogy in Los Angeles. Before this, she worked office jobs to support her family and only landed small film roles, like a brief appearance in Tootsie. Her perfect timing and sharp humor as Sophia, like telling Blanche, "Your life's an open blouse," made her a fan favorite. Even though Sophia was meant to be a minor character, Getty won an Emmy in 1988 and became one of the show's most beloved stars. In the fall of 1984, something funny happened during an NBC promotional special. Doris Roberts, who was on Remington Steele, and Selma Diamond from Night Court were doing a skit together. During the bit, Diamond misheard the name of the show Miami Vice and said, "Miami Nice? It must be about a bunch of old people sitting around playing Pinochle." Everyone laughed. It was just a joke. But one man in the room, Warren Littlefield, saw something more. He was NBC's Senior Vice President of Comedy Development, and the idea of a show about older women stuck with him. That offhand comment led to something unexpected. Instead of waiting for writers to bring him a script, Littlefield flipped the usual process. He went straight to writer Susan Harris and pitched her the idea. It was rare to see older women at the center of a TV show, but Harris was intrigued. Years later, the author Matt Baumey would call it one of the luckiest accidents in television history. That joke turned into The Golden Girls, a show that would go on to earn 68 Emmy nominations and win 11. At first, the casting plan looked very different. Producers wanted Betty White to play Blanche, the flirty Southern woman, and Rue McClanahan to play Rose, the sweet, naive one. It made sense. White had played a similar role on The Mary Tyler Moore Show, and McClanahan had been the scatterbrained Vivian on Maude. But Bea Arthur wasn't impressed. When McClanahan called to tell her about the project, Arthur said, "Rue, I don't want to do Maude and Vivian meet Sue Ann Nivens. Boring." Things changed thanks to a smart decision by the show's pilot director, Jay Sandrich. During auditions, he asked McClanahan to read for Blanche instead of Rose. Then he had White read for Rose. That switch changed everything. Arthur liked the new direction and agreed to join. The last-minute role reversal helped the actresses break free from their old typecast roles and made room for two unforgettable characters. Estelle Getty, who played Sophia, had her own journey. Though she played the oldest character, Getty was actually younger than both White and Arthur. To look the part, she sat through 45 minutes of makeup every day. But it wasn't just makeup that helped her become Sophia. Before her audition, she went shopping in the Fairfax district of Los Angeles, looking for items that would help her stand out. That's when she found a small wicker purse. It seemed perfect, and she made it part of Sophia's look. It became so iconic that the wardrobe department made a backup in case something ever happened to it. Betty White opened up in a 2011 interview about something fans had wondered for years: her rocky relationship with her Golden Girls co-star, Bea Arthur. Almost 2 decades after the show ended, Betty admitted, "She was not that fond of me. She found me a pain in the neck sometimes." According to Betty, her cheerful attitude often rubbed Bea the wrong way. "Sometimes, if I was happy, she'd be furious," she said with a laugh. It surprised many, especially those who saw nothing but friendship between Rose and Dorothy on screen. But even with that tension behind the scenes, the two remained professional. They never let it affect their acting, and both won Emmy Awards for their work on the show. Then came another twist. In a 2023 tell-all book, Joel Thurm, a casting director at NBC during the Golden Girls era, made a shocking claim. He said he once heard Bea Arthur refer to Betty White using a very harsh and offensive word. Thurm also mentioned that Rue McClanahan, who played Blanche, had made similar comments, though later reports said Rue only called Betty a bit of a handful. Thurm believed the root of the tension was in how different the women were as performers. Bea was serious, a theater-trained actress who needed space to prepare. Betty, on the other hand, had a lighter, more relaxed style. She didn't rehearse the same way and enjoyed chatting with the audience between scenes, something Bea didn't appreciate. Years later, Bea's son, Matthew Sachs, offered a softer perspective. In an interview, he explained that his mom didn't hate Betty. She just had a complicated way of dealing with her. It was fun to have someone to be annoyed with, he said. He compared it to the idea that everyone needs a neighbor who gets under their skin. Betty happened to be that person for Bea. Still, Matthew made it clear that despite their ups and downs, his mother liked Betty in her own way and even shared rides with her in the early seasons of the show. At the heart of it all was a major clash in working styles. Bea came from Broadway, where staying in character and focusing deeply between takes was the norm. Betty came from live TV and game shows. She was used to laughing with the crowd, flirting with the audience, and keeping things light. Jim Colucci, author of a book on the show, described how Betty would sometimes lift her skirt and joke with fans during breaks. That kind of behavior didn't sit well with Bea, who held onto her script until the very last minute and took each performance very seriously. Tension among the cast of the Golden Girls first started to show during the 1986 Emmy Awards. All four actresses were nominated for Best Lead Actress in a Comedy Series, but it was Betty White who won the award. That win didn't sit well with Bea Arthur. According to Rue McClanahan's memoir, Bea was furious and even called Betty a terrible name backstage. Bea had always seen herself as the serious, stage-trained actress. She didn't think much of Betty, whom she dismissed as a game show personality from her Password days. Even though all four eventually won Emmys, Rue in 1987 and Bea and Estelle Getty in 1988, some say that Betty's early win created a divide that never fully healed. Their acting styles didn't help matters. Betty would memorize her lines right away and sometimes even added jokes that the writers loved. She enjoyed chatting with the studio audience between scenes and brought a light, friendly energy to the set. Bea, on the other hand, kept her script in hand until the last minute. She liked to stay in character and often went backstage between takes to stay focused. Her son later explained that she just didn't think those breaks were the right time to socialize. Betty could do it without losing focus, but for Bea, it was distracting and it annoyed her. As the show went on, Bea's frustration grew. By the 7th season, she was tired of the jokes about her character, Dorothy. Unlike the other characters, Rose's silliness, Blanche's love life, Sophia's age, the jokes about Dorothy often felt personal. They poked fun at her looks, her voice, and her height. Bea felt like she was being made fun of, not just Dorothy. She even asked the writers why they kept making Dorothy seem unattractive or awkward. This frustration became one of the reasons she decided to leave the show, even though it was still one of the most popular shows on TV. NBC even tried bringing in Debbie Reynolds for a test episode, but Bea agreed to stay one more season before walking away for good. There was also quiet sadness on set as Estelle Getty began struggling with her lines. Even though she played Sophia, Dorothy's mother, Estelle was actually younger than Bea. Around season 3, people noticed she was having trouble remembering what to say. At first, it was blamed on nerves, but over time, it got worse. Some say Betty made fun of Estelle's forgetfulness in front of the live audience. Others believe Betty was actually trying to help, using humor to distract the crowd and give Estelle time to recover. Estelle began writing her lines on props and eventually used cue cards. While some cast members didn't always get along on the Golden Girls, Betty White and Rue McClanahan formed a real friendship that lasted the entire 7 years the show was on the air. They both loved word games and made a habit of playing them every day between takes. Rue once said they always had a game going off camera. During breaks in filming, they'd create little puzzles for each other, then solve them after the work was done. Their bond wasn't just about games, though. Betty even let Rue know when the brother of Mary Tyler Moore had puppies, just because she knew Rue loved animals. That tip led to Rue adopting her third dog. Sometimes, Rue would even join Betty in chatting with the audience between scenes, even though Bea Arthur didn't like it. Things behind the scenes weren't always simple, though. In an interview after the show ended, Rue shared something surprising. Bea Arthur wouldn't go to lunch unless Betty came too. This shocked fans because it didn't match the common story that Bea and Betty didn't get along. Apparently, Bea would wait for Betty, even if she was running late, just so they could eat together. They even sat next to each other at Friday night dinners during shooting weeks. Betty confirmed in her autobiography that they had lunch together almost every day. It's strange, because Bea supposedly found Betty's cheerful attitude annoying. But clearly, their relationship wasn't just about conflict. It was complicated, maybe even a kind of friendship beneath all the tension. There was another detail that added to the mystery of their connection. Early in the show's run, Betty and Bea actually carpooled together. They lived close to each other in Los Angeles and rode together to the NBC studio in Burbank for a while. This stopped around 1988, which was about the same time things between them started to sour. One reason for the change might have been Bea's frustration with how Betty interacted with the live audience. According to people who knew them, their different styles caused some friction. Bea was more serious and theater-trained, while Betty liked to keep things light and connect with the crowd. What started as a practical carpool between co-stars slowly faded as those differences grew stronger. Rue McClanahan often found herself in the middle of it all. She'd worked with Bea before on Maude, and she was the one who convinced her to join the Golden Girls in the first place. In her memoir, Rue gave a fair take on Bea and Betty's relationship. She said it wasn't as close as she wished, but it never got in the way of their work. Rue always tried to stay positive about the group, even when things weren't perfect. She once said the set was still a happy place, despite the behind-the-scenes tension. But she did admit that Bea was very upset when Betty won an Emmy before her in 1986. That moment really seemed to bother Bea, who was reportedly furious about it. Still, thanks to Rue's steady presence and the professionalism of everyone involved, the show remained strong all the way to the end. Estelle Getty, who played the sharp-tongued Sophia on The Golden Girls, had a secret struggle that lasted through the entire show. While audiences saw a confident, funny character, Getty was often terrified behind the scenes. Her stage fright was so bad, it began the day before filming. Rue McClanahan, her co-star, once said you could see it in her, like a dark cloud following her around. By the time they were ready to tape, Getty would become distant and unreachable. Even though she'd acted in theater before, including a praised performance in Torch Song Trilogy, television was different. The fast pace and live audience overwhelmed her. By 1988, things got so hard that producers finally let her use cue cards, even though that was usually seen as unprofessional. She tried everything she could think of to calm her nerves. Hypnosis, assistance, constant line practice, but nothing really worked. At one point, the show even hired someone just to help her memorize lines. Still, the fear stayed. When the show began in 1985, Getty was 62, but her character Sophia was much older. Every day, she went through a 45-minute transformation. Fake wrinkles, heavy makeup, thick glasses, and a white wig. It worked so well that many fans didn't even recognize her outside of costume. Ironically, she was actually younger than Bea Arthur, who played her daughter on the show. As her memory started to slip, Getty found ways to hide it. She wrote lines on props, like her iconic wicker purse, and even turned some of her stumbles into part of Sophia's charm. This creativity helped keep her performance alive, even when things were tough. Off camera, though, things could feel lonely. In a 1987 interview, Getty was asked if the cast spent time together outside of work. She answered honestly, "We all have such different lives, really. I really would love to hang out with them, but they don't let me." It was a sad glimpse into the real-life dynamic. On screen, they were close friends, but in reality, the bond wasn't always there. During breaks, the others would chat and laugh together. Sometimes they'd even joke that they sounded like the Golden Girls themselves, but Getty often felt left out. Unlike her co-stars, who had long careers in television, Getty had only started acting professionally at 55. She admired the others and felt a bit intimidated by their experience. They worked closely with the writers, helping shape their lines. Getty didn't do that. In fact, she often asked for fewer lines because of her anxiety. Still, she cared deeply about them. In 2001, when Rue McClanahan performed in The Vagina Monologues, Getty showed up to support her. Even though she had a broken arm, she didn't want to let her friend down. That kind of quiet loyalty said a lot about who she really was. Bea Arthur left the Golden Girls in May 1992, after 7 very successful seasons. That decision brought the beloved series to an end. According to Jim Colucci's book, Golden Girls Forever, Arthur had grown increasingly upset with how the writers joked about her character, Dorothy. They often made her the punchline, calling her big and ugly. And while the other actresses could laugh off their characters' quirks, Arthur took it personally. By early 1993, 1992, she was 70 years old and had already decided she wouldn't come back for an 8th season. She told producers she felt the show's quality was starting to slip. This wasn't the first time she'd made a bold exit. She had done the same with Maude years earlier, choosing to leave while the show was still doing well. Her son, Matthew Sachs, later explained that she felt the writers were running out of good ideas, and the heavy workload was too much at her age. Arthur passed away in 2009, just a few weeks before turning 87. After she left, NBC tried to keep the magic alive with a spin-off called The Golden Palace. Betty White, Rue McClanahan, and Estelle Getty returned to their roles, but now their characters had bought a hotel. The show started strong, with guest stars and even Don Cheadle as the hotel manager, but the audience didn't stick around. Ratings dropped fast, and despite a few efforts, including B. Arthur returning for 2 episodes, the show couldn't recover. It was canceled after just 1 season and 24 episodes, and many storylines were left hanging. Without Dorothy, something essential was missing. Off-screen, the cast was nothing like the characters fans loved. Rue McClanahan often said, "None of us was like our characters." She believed Betty White was the least like her role, since Rose's sweet cluelessness was very different from White's quick wit and sharp mind. Estelle Getty had Sophia's timing, but not her boldness. In fact, Getty suffered from severe stage fright. She would get extremely anxious the day before filming, and often struggled to remember her lines. Even though she played a tough Italian mother, Getty kept asking producers if they could make the characters Jewish. It would have felt more natural to her. And despite how close the women seemed on screen, things were tense behind the scenes. The biggest friction was between B. Arthur and Betty White. In a 2023 podcast, casting director Joel Thurm revealed that Arthur had used very harsh language to describe White. Arthur's son said his mom often needed someone to be upset with, and White ended up being that person. The tension may have started because of how differently they worked. White liked chatting with the studio audience between takes, which Arthur found unprofessional and distracting. There was also jealousy, especially after White won the first Emmy of the group in 1986. McClanahan later said Arthur was devastated and angry about it. Even though they worked side by side for years, the cast didn't spend much time together outside of the set. Arthur, despite her complaints, wouldn't go to lunch unless White agreed to join her. Most of their off-screen time together happened at award shows or work-related events. That distance made the warmth and laughter they created on screen all the more impressive.